The day started like any other, another long shift at the office, a quick stop at the gym, and then heading home. But as I opened the door to our house that evening, the world as I knew it shattered in an instant. The first thing that hit me was the sound. Muffled voices coming from upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, hoping I was wrong. I crept up the stairs, every step feeling like a mile. As I reached our bedroom, the door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see inside. There she was, my wife, Jennifer, in our bed, with another man. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Then the shock gave way to a fiery anger that rose up from the pit of my stomach. I slammed the door open, and they both jumped, scrambling for the covers. "What the hell is going on?" I roared, my voice shaking with rage. Jennifer didn't say a word. She just stared at me, her face pale but strangely calm. The guy beside her looked terrified. But she didn't even flinch. No apologies, no excuses, nothing. Just cold, empty silence. "Get out," I spat, directing my words at the man who had the nerve to be in my bed. He grabbed his clothes and bolted, leaving me alone with her. Jennifer stood up, wrapping the sheet around herself. "It's not what you think," she said, finally breaking the silence. "Not what I think?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I saw you, Jennifer. How long has this been going on?" But instead of answering, she just shook her head. "You wouldn't understand," she muttered, walking past me and out of the room. My fists clenched at my sides, every muscle in my body tense, but I let her go. I couldn't deal with her right then. I needed to get out of there before I did something I'd regret. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me, and drove aimlessly through the night, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was racing. How had I missed the signs? When did she start seeing someone else? And why the hell was she acting like this wasn't a big deal? I couldn't go back that night. I ended up crashing at a friend's place, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a jumbled mess. The image of them together played on a loop in my mind, tormenting me until the sun finally rose. The next day, I knew I had to face reality. I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. Jennifer had betrayed me, and I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called in a favor from a friend who knew a private investigator. Within days, I had answers. The investigator confirmed my worst fears. Jennifer had been seeing this guy, Mark, for months behind my back. They'd been meeting in secret while I was at work or on business trips, laughing at my ignorance. But that wasn't all. As I dug deeper, another disturbing pattern emerged. Jennifer had been asking for money lately, more than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. We'd always shared our finances openly. But now, it seemed like every other week she had some new expense that needed covering. It was as if she had a never-ending list of emergencies. With the truth in front of me, everything started to click. The coldness in her eyes the night I caught her, the lack of remorse, the casual way she'd been treating me lately, it all made sense now. Jennifer didn't just want Mark, she wanted more. More freedom, more excitement, more money. The realization hit me hard. Jennifer had been using me, not just emotionally, but financially too. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been playing me for a fool. But if she thought she could get away with it, she was dead wrong. I wasn't about to let her walk all over me, not after everything I'd sacrificed for our marriage. She wanted more? Well, I'd show her what that looked like. As I plotted my next move, a cold resolve settled over me. I wasn't just going to end this marriage, I was going to make sure Jennifer paid for every lie, every deceitful act. Did she want to live without me? Fine. But she was going to do it without a single cent to her name. A few days passed, but the anger inside me didn't fade, it only grew stronger. I knew I had to confront Jennifer, but this time, I would be the one in control. The investigator's report was my weapon, and I intended to use it to dismantle the life she'd built on lies. That evening, I waited for her in the living room. When Jennifer walked in, she looked surprised to see me sitting there, as if she hadn't expected me to be home. I gestured for her to sit, and for a moment, she hesitated. But something in my eyes must have told her this wasn't a request. "Sit down, Jennifer," I said, my voice cold and steady. She finally took a seat, her expression guarded. "What's this about?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of photos and documents the investigator had given me. I tossed them onto the coffee table between us. watching as she glanced at them, her eyes widening in shock. What is this? She stammered, reaching for the photos. Your little affair, I replied, leaning back in my chair. Mark, right? You've been seeing him for months. While I was out working, trying to provide for us, you were busy screwing him behind my back. Jennifer's face drained of color. She flipped through the photos, her hands trembling. It's not what you think. Save it, I cut her off. I've heard enough of your lies. I know everything now. How long you've been seeing him, where you've been meeting, and how you've been spending my money to fund your little escapades. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no pity. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered, her voice breaking. You didn't just hurt me, Jennifer, I said, my tone icy. You betrayed me. You used me. And now, you're going to pay for it. I stood up, towering over her. Here's what's going to happen. I've already moved our money to an account you can't touch. You're cut off. No more credit cards, no more access to our savings, nothing. She gasped, shaking her head. You can't do that. I already have, I replied. And that's not all. I've changed the locks. You're not welcome here anymore. You can pack your things and go. The look on her face was one of pure panic. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing her. Don't even think about trying to manipulate me. You made your choice, Jennifer. Now, you get to live with the consequences. As she sat there, stunned into silence, I felt a grim satisfaction. I had taken back control of my life, and for the first time in weeks. I felt like I could breathe again. Leave, I said quietly. And don't come back. Jennifer stood slowly, the tears finally spilling over. She hesitated as if she wanted to say something, but I turned my back on her, walking away. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her lies. I was done with all of it. She left the house that night, and I knew she was gone for good. But as the door closed behind her, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. Despite everything, this was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. But that life was over now, and there was no going back. The days after Jennifer's departure were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and quiet solitude. I filed for divorce immediately, making sure I had full control over our assets. The lawyer assured me that with the evidence of her affair, I had a strong case. Still, it didn't make the process any easier. Jennifer tried to contact me a few times, leaving desperate voicemails. But I ignored them all. I knew she was probably scrambling, trying to figure out how to survive without the financial safety net I had provided for so long. The thought brought a grim smile to my face, but it was tinged with bitterness. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I couldn't deny that a part of me felt vindicated. She had chosen to betray me, to throw away everything we had, and now she was facing the consequences of that choice. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I started to see the full extent of the damage Jennifer had done. The financial requests, the lies about where the money was going, it all added up. She had been bleeding me dry while building her fantasy life with Mark. But now, with the accounts locked down and the credit cards canceled, that fantasy was crumbling. One day, as I was sorting through more paperwork, I got a call from our lawyer. She's not contesting the divorce, he said. She's agreed to your terms. It was a relief. But it also felt hollow. The fight was over before it had really begun. Maybe Jennifer had realized there was no winning this battle, or maybe she was too broken to even try. Either way, it was done. All that was left was the final court date. In the weeks that followed, I tried to adjust to my new life. The house was empty, and the silence was deafening. I'd lost more than a wife. I'd lost a future, a dream I'd once cherished. But I refused to let the sorrow consume me. Instead, I threw myself into work, into rebuilding what had been lost. Friends and family rallied around me, offering support and encouragement. Some were shocked by the way things had unfolded, while others admitted they'd seen the signs long before I had. Their honesty was painful but necessary. I needed to hear the truth, even if it hurt. One evening, as I was sitting alone in the living room, I found myself thinking about the past few years, about the love that had once been there and the betrayal that had destroyed it. The pain was still raw, but there was a sense of closure now. I had done everything I could to protect myself, to reclaim what was mine. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but I was ready to face it. Jennifer was out of my life for good, and I was determined to build something new, something better. As I looked around the house, I realized it no longer felt like the home we had shared. It was just a place now, a shell of what it used to be. And that was okay, because I was ready to move on, to leave the past behind and start over. Jennifer had wanted more, and she had paid the price for her greed. Now, it was my turn to take back my life. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone take it from me. With the divorce finalized and Jennifer officially out of my life, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness. But now, for the first time, there was also a strange sense of calm. It was like the eye of a storm, a moment of stillness after the chaos. The house, once a home filled with memories of us, now felt like a blank canvas. The emptiness that had once suffocated me was starting to feel liberating. I could finally breathe again, free from the constant weight of suspicion and doubt. But with that freedom came the question, what now? I decided to start with small changes. The first thing I did was redecorate the house. I got rid of everything that reminded me of Jennifer, her furniture, her decorations. Even the color scheme she had insisted on. The process was surprisingly cathartic. Every item I removed felt like a piece of the past being lifted off my shoulders. I replaced the old one with the new one. A fresh coat of paint on the walls, new furniture that reflected my taste, not hers. The space transformed, and so did I. It was no longer a place haunted by memories of a broken marriage. It was a sanctuary, a place where I could start over. Work became my refuge during this time. I threw myself into projects, taking on more responsibilities and even considering a promotion. The office was a place where I could focus, where the past didn't linger in every corner. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Some were surprised by my sudden burst of energy, while others simply nodded in understanding. They didn't need to know the details, they could see that I was moving forward. But it wasn't just about work. I knew that to truly start fresh, I needed to rebuild my social life too. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. I started saying yes to invitations, dinners, outings, even a weekend hiking trip. Each event was a step toward reclaiming the parts of myself that had been lost in the shadow of my relationship with Jennifer. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I found myself sitting at the bar of a small, cozy pub I'd started frequenting. As I sipped my drink, I couldn't help but notice the sense of contentment settling over me. I was alone, but not lonely. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with where I was. That's when I met Claire. She was sitting a few stools down from me, reading a book. There was something about her that caught my eye, a quiet confidence, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a chance. "Good book?" I asked, sliding into the seat next to her. She looked up, surprised, but then smiled. "It is, actually. Just what I needed after a long day." We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. There was an ease to our conversation, a natural connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. Claire was smart, funny, and genuine, everything I hadn't realized I was missing. As the night wore on, I found myself sharing more with her than I had with anyone else since the divorce. I didn't tell her everything, but enough for her to understand that I was in the middle of rebuilding my life. She listened without judgment, offering her own stories in return. By the time we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel so soon, hope. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I continued to see each other. What started as casual drinks turned into dinners, long walks, and late-night conversations. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other. And the more I got to know her, the more I found myself drawn to her. But with that growing connection came a new set of challenges. My experience with Jennifer had left deep scars. Ones that weren't so easily healed. Every time Claire and I got closer, I felt a twinge of fear, a nagging doubt in the back of my mind. Could I really trust her? Or was I setting myself up to be hurt again? Claire seemed to sense my hesitation. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city, she turned to me, her expression serious. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she asked gently. I nodded, unsure of how much to say. "Yeah, more than I ever expected." "I'm not asking for details," she said, taking my hand in hers. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm not Jennifer, and I'm not going to hurt you. But you have to let me in, even just a little bit." Her words struck a chord with me. I realized that I had been holding back, not because I didn't care for her, but because I was afraid of getting hurt again. But Claire was right. If I wanted to move forward, I had to let go of that fear, at least enough to give her a chance. I know, I admitted, squeezing her hand. It's just hard, you know? After everything that happened, trusting someone new feels like a risk. I get that, she replied. But sometimes, the biggest risks are the ones worth taking. As we sat there, watching the city lights twinkle below us, I made a decision. I couldn't let my past dictate my future. Claire was offering me something real, something worth pursuing, and I wasn't going to let fear hold me back. The next day, I made a conscious effort to open up to her. I told her more about my marriage, about how Jennifer's betrayal had shattered my trust. Claire listened, her eyes full of understanding. She didn't push or pry, she simply let me share what I was comfortable with. In return, she shared more about her own life, her past relationships, her dreams, her fears. We talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of trust brick by brick. As we grew closer, I started to realize that what I had with Claire was different from anything I'd ever experienced before. It wasn't just about attraction or companionship. It was about mutual respect, honesty, and the willingness to be vulnerable. One evening, as we were walking through the park, Claire turned to me with a smile. You know, I've never felt this comfortable with someone so quickly. It's like we've known each other for years. I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me. I feel the same way. And that's why I want to be honest with you, Claire. I don't want to rush things, but I do want to see where this goes. You're important to me. She reached up, gently touching my cheek. I'm not in a rush either. Let's just take it one day at a time, okay? Okay, I agreed, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. As we continued our walk, hand in hand, I knew that I was finally on the path to healing. Claire was helping me rebuild the trust that had been broken, and in the process, she was becoming someone I could see a future with. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but I was learning to let go of the past and embrace the possibilities of the future. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Things with Claire were going well, better than I had expected, given everything I'd been through. We were taking our time, enjoying each other's company, and building something real. But just as I started to feel like I was finally moving on, the past came crashing back into my life in the most unexpected way. It was a Friday evening and Claire and I had planned a quiet night in. She was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, while I scrolled through emails on my phone. That's when I saw it, an email from Jennifer. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at her name on the screen. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. The last thing I wanted was to deal with her now, especially with Claire in the next room. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the email. Adam, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I've made mistakes, and I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I do need closure. Could we meet? Just once. Jennifer. I felt a mixture of emotions, anger, confusion, and a hint of something I didn't want to admit to myself. Part of me wanted to delete the email and never think about it again, but another part of me wondered if meeting her could finally put the past to rest. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Claire enter the room until she placed a hand on my shoulder. Everything okay? She asked, her eyes full of concern. I hesitated for a moment before handing her my phone. Jennifer emailed me. She wants to meet. Claire read the email, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she handed the phone back to me. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks it's a terrible idea, but maybe it would help to get some closure. Claire nodded slowly. If you think it'll help, then maybe you should go. Just, be careful, okay? I don't want her to hurt you again. I'll be careful, I promised, squeezing her hand. I won't let her mess with my life anymore. The next day, I replied to Jennifer's email, agreeing to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. I didn't tell Claire exactly when or where. I didn't want to worry her, but I reassured her that I'd keep my distance and that this was about closure, nothing more. When the day came, I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't seen Jennifer in months, and the thought of facing her again stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the door. A few minutes later, she walked in. She looked different, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. But despite the changes, she was still Jennifer, the woman I'd once loved and the woman who had shattered my trust. She spotted me and walked over, her steps hesitant. Adam, she said softly as she sat down. Thank you for coming. I nodded, unsure of what to say. There was an awkward silence as we both took in the reality of the situation. I'm not here to make excuses, Jennifer began, her voice trembling slightly. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to talk to you, to explain why I did what I did. I listened, feeling a strange detachment as she spoke. She told me about how unhappy she had been, how she had felt trapped in our marriage, and how she had sought out Mark as an escape. She admitted that it was selfish and wrong, but at the time, she hadn't seen any other way out. I never wanted to hurt you, Adam, she said, her eyes filling with tears. I was just so lost, and I made terrible choices. But losing you, it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I know I can't undo the damage, but I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry. Her words hung in the air between us. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her that sorry wasn't enough. But another part of me realized that nothing she could say would change what had happened. The damage was done, and we were both living with the consequences. I appreciate you saying that, I finally replied, my voice steady. But the truth is, Jennifer, I've moved on. I'm in a better place now, and I'm with someone who makes me happy. Meeting you today, it hasn't changed that. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I'm glad you're happy, Adam. You deserve it. I just needed to say this. For both our sakes. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the weight of our shared history heavy between us. Finally, Jennifer stood up, signaling that it was time to go. I won't bother you again, she said quietly. I just wanted you to know. I'm truly sorry. I nodded, standing up as well. Goodbye, Jennifer. I hope you find peace. With that, she walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I watched her go, feeling a sense of finality. This chapter of my life was finally closed. And I could move forward without the shadows of the past hanging over me. When I returned home that evening, Claire was waiting for me. She looked up from the book she was reading as I walked through the door, her eyes searching mine for answers. I smiled, trying to reassure her. It's over, I said simply. We talked, and now it's done. She put the book aside and stood up, wrapping her arms around me. Are you okay? Yeah, I replied, holding her close. I think I am. We stood there for a moment, just holding each other, letting the weight of the day dissipate. I could feel the tension leaving my body as I realized that the past was truly behind me now. Jennifer was gone, and I was free to build a future with Claire without any lingering doubts or fears. As the days passed, our relationship grew stronger. The encounter with Jennifer had been a test, and we had come through it together. It made me realize just how much Claire meant to me, and how much I was willing to fight for our relationship. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to her, my heart pounding with a different kind of nervousness. Claire, I've been thinking about us. About the future. She looked at me, her eyes soft and full of understanding. What about it? I want to build a life with you, I said, my voice steady. I know we've been taking things slow, but I'm ready to take the next step. I want us to move in together, to start planning our future. I want you to know that I'm all in. A smile spread across her face, lighting up her features. I've been thinking the same thing, she admitted. I'm ready too, Adam. I want to build a life with you. Hearing those words felt like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. We spent the next few weeks making plans, merging our lives, finding a new place to call home, and talking about what the future might hold. It was exciting and a little scary, but more than anything, it felt right. Moving in together was a new chapter. One that we both embraced wholeheartedly. We found a beautiful apartment with a view of the city, a place that was truly ours. Decorating it together, filling it with our memories and our love, was a process that brought us even closer. There were moments when the past tried to creep back in, when I would catch myself doubting, or when a memory of Jennifer would surface. But each time, Claire was there, reminding me of the love and trust we were building together. She became my anchor, my safe place, and I knew that with her, I could face anything. As we settled into our new life, I realized just how far I had come. The man who had once been shattered by betrayal was now rebuilding his life with someone who truly cared for him. It wasn't always easy, and there were still challenges to face, but I was ready to face them head on. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Claire turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what's next for us? She asked, her voice soft. Sometimes, I replied, smiling at her. But honestly, I'm just happy to be where we are right now. We've come a long way, and I'm excited for whatever the future holds. She leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. Me too, she whispered. As long as we're together, I know we'll be okay. And in that moment, I knew she was right. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities. With Claire by my side, I was ready to face whatever came our way. The past was behind us, and the future was ours to create, together. Life with Claire had been more than I could have hoped for. Moving in together had solidified our bond, and we were creating a life that felt both stable and exciting. But as with all good things, life had a way of throwing curveballs, and ours came in the form of an unexpected challenge. It started with small things, subtle changes in Claire's behavior that I might not have noticed if I weren't so attuned to her. She became more withdrawn, her usual warmth and openness replaced by a quiet, almost distant demeanor. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Work had been demanding for both of us, and I figured she was just feeling the pressure. But as the weeks went on, the changes became more pronounced. She would often seem lost in thought, her mind clearly elsewhere even when we were together. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed off my concerns, insisting that everything was fine. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, I decided to press the issue. Claire, I've noticed that you've been a bit distant lately. Is something going on? You can talk to me, you know. She looked up from her plate, her expression a mix of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I'm sorry, Adam, I didn't mean to worry you. It's just, there's a lot on my mind. What's bothering you? I asked gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine as if trying to decide how much to share. It's work, she finally said. Things have been really tough lately. There's a lot of pressure to perform, and I'm not sure I'm handling it as well as I should be. I nodded, squeezing her hand reassuringly. We can get through this together. Whatever it is, I'm here for you. She smiled weakly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I know, and I appreciate that. I need to figure some things out on my own. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Claire's struggles than she was letting on. I wanted to help her, to be there for her in the same way she had been for me, but I also knew that pushing too hard could drive a wedge between us. The next few weeks were a delicate balance. I gave Claire the space she needed, but I also made sure she knew I was there whenever she was ready to talk. We continued with our daily routines, but the tension between us was palpable. It was like a dark cloud hanging over our relationship, one that neither of us knew how to dispel. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Claire suddenly turned to me, her face pale and her eyes filled with fear. Adam, I need to tell you something. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. I've been offered a promotion at work. It's a huge opportunity, but it would mean relocating to the other side of the country. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to process what she had just said. Relocating? But what about us? I don't know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I've been so torn, Adam. I love you, and I don't want to lose what we have, but this job, it's something I've worked for my entire career. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distance, the stress, the sleepless nights. Claire had been grappling with this decision on her own, trying to figure out how to choose between her career and our relationship. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, sadness. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't know how, she admitted. I was scared of what it might mean for us. We sat there in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on us. The future that had seemed so certain was now clouded with uncertainty. How could we make this work? Could we survive a long-distance relationship? Or would this be the end of us? I don't want to lose you, I finally said, my voice raw with emotion. But I also don't want you to give up your dreams for me. Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with love and pain. I don't want to lose you either, Adam. But I also don't want to resent you for holding me back. Her words cut deep, but I knew she was right. This was an impossible situation, one with no easy answers. We both had dreams and now they were pulling us in different directions. That night, as we lay in bed, neither of us spoke. We held each other tightly as if trying to ward off the inevitable. But deep down, I knew that this was a turning point. A moment that would define our future. The days that followed were some of the hardest we'd faced as a couple. Claire and I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the looming decision hung over us like a shadow. We went about our routines, but everything felt different, more fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter the life we'd built together. We both knew we had to make a decision, but the more we talked about it, the more complicated it seemed. There was no simple solution, no clear path forward. It felt like we were at a crossroads, with no idea which direction to take. One evening, as we sat in the park, the weight of the situation finally became too much to bear. "Claire," I said quietly, breaking the silence between us, "I think we need to figure out what we really want, both individually and as a couple." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I've been thinking the same thing. But every time I try to make a decision, I get scared of making the wrong choice and losing everything." "I get that," I replied, taking her hand in mine. "But we can't stay in this limbo forever. We have to face this head on, even if it means making some tough decisions." We sat there for a long time, talking through our options. We considered everything: long distance, me moving with her, even the possibility of taking a break to figure things out. But every option had its own set of challenges, and none of them felt right. "I hate the thought of being apart," Claire said, her voice trembling. "But I also don't want to hold you back from your own life here. I know how much you love your job, and I don't want you to resent me for asking you to leave it. And I don't want to be the reason you give up your career," I replied. "But I also can't imagine my life without you in it." We were at an impasse, both of us unwilling to sacrifice our dreams, but also unwilling to lose each other. It was a painful realization, one that neither of us wanted to face, but one that was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. Finally, Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and sorrow. "Adam, I think we need to take some time apart. Not because I want to end things, but because I think we both need space to figure out what we really want." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. The thought of being apart from Claire, even temporarily, was almost unbearable. But deep down, I knew she was right. We were stuck in a cycle of indecision, and the only way to break free was to take a step back and reassess. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's not what I want, but I understand why you think it's necessary. We need to figure out what's best for us, even if that means spending some time apart." Claire nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose you, Adam. But I also don't want us to make decisions out of fear. If we're going to make this work, we need to be sure." We agreed to take a break, giving each other the space to think things through. It was one of the hardest decisions we'd ever made. But it also felt like the only way forward. We both needed clarity, and the only way to find it was to take a step back and look at our lives from a distance. As we prepared for our time apart, I felt a deep sense of sadness, but also a glimmer of hope. If our relationship was meant to be, this time apart would only make us stronger. And if not, well, then we would have to face that reality too. The night before Claire was set to leave for her new job, we spent one last evening together. We didn't talk about the future or what might happen next. Instead, we focused on the present, savoring the time we had left. As we lay in bed, holding each other close, I whispered, "No matter what happens, I'll always love you, Claire." She kissed me gently, tears in her eyes. "I love you too, Adam. We'll figure this out, one way or another." The next morning, I watched as Claire packed her bags, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. When she was ready to go, we stood in the doorway, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice trembling. "It's just a new chapter." I nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We'll get through this, Claire. I believe that." With one last kiss, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, feeling both hopeful and heartbroken. As I watched her drive away, I knew that our relationship was entering uncharted territory. The future was uncertain, and I had no idea what it would hold. But for now, all I could do was trust that whatever happened next, it would be what was meant to be. Claire's absence was like a void that seemed to grow with each passing day. The apartment we'd made our home now felt empty, echoing with memories of what once was. But I knew this time apart was necessary, even if it was painful. The first few days after she left were the hardest. I found myself reaching for my phone, wanting to text her, to hear her voice, but I held back. We had agreed on this break for a reason, and I needed to respect that. Instead, I threw myself into work, trying to fill the hours with meetings, projects, and anything that could distract me from the ache in my chest. But at night, when the world was quiet and there were no distractions, the loneliness crept in. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations we'd had, and moments we'd shared. I kept wondering if this break was the beginning of the end, or if it was just a necessary step towards something better. As the days turned into weeks, I began to focus on myself in a way I hadn't in years. I started going to the gym more regularly, pushing myself physically to match the emotional challenges I was facing. I took up meditation, hoping to find some peace amidst the chaos in my mind. I even started cooking for myself, something I'd always left to Claire. It was a way of asserting my independence, of proving to myself that I could survive without her. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the thoughts of her were always there, just beneath the surface. I wondered how she was doing, whether she missed me as much as I missed her, whether she was having doubts about our relationship too. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I decided to visit the place where Claire and I had first met, a cozy little cafe on the corner of Maple and Fifth. It was a spot we'd stumbled upon by chance, and from that day on, it had become our favorite place to unwind together. As I walked through the door, the familiar scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries hit me, bringing with it a wave of nostalgia. I ordered a drink and sat down at our usual table by the window. It was strange being there alone, but at the same time, it felt right. This was where it all began, and perhaps it was a good place to start reflecting on what the future might hold. As I sipped my coffee, I let my mind wander. I thought about the man I was before I met Claire, broken, reeling from betrayal, unsure if I'd ever trust again. And then I thought about the man I'd become with her by my side, stronger, more open, willing to take risks in the name of love. But now, I was at a crossroads. I could feel myself changing again, evolving into someone who could stand on his own 2 feet, who could love deeply but also protect his own heart. It was a realization that brought with it both clarity and sadness. I loved Claire, but I was beginning to see that love alone might not be enough to hold us together. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from an old friend, Mike, who I hadn't seen in years. He was in town for a few days and wanted to catch up. Normally, I would have declined, preferring to stay in my routine, but something told me that this was exactly what I needed. We met at a bar downtown, and as soon as I saw Mike, I felt a sense of relief. He was the same as ever, laid back, with a sharp wit and a way of making everything seem less serious than it was. We talked about old times and our jobs. And eventually, the conversation turned to Claire. "So, what's going on with you two?" Mike asked, taking a sip of his beer. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "We're taking a break. She got a job offer across the country, and we're trying to figure out what that means for us." Mike nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "That's tough, man. But sometimes, a break can be a good thing. Gives you both a chance to figure out what you really want." "That's what I keep telling myself," I replied. "But it doesn't make it any easier. I love her, Mike, but I don't want to be the reason she gives up her dreams. And I don't want to give up mine either." Mike leaned back in his chair, considering my words. "You know, sometimes we think we have to make these big sacrifices for the people we love. But maybe it's not about sacrifice. Maybe it's about finding a way to make both of your dreams work together. If it's meant to be, you'll find a way. And if not, well, then maybe it wasn't meant to be." His words struck a chord with me. I had been so focused on the idea of sacrifice, on what Claire might have to give up for us, or what I might have to give up for her, that I hadn't considered the possibility that we could find a way to make it work without losing ourselves in the process. As I left the bar that night, I felt a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in weeks. I couldn't control what the future held, but I could control how I approached it.